Hello out there. This is David Rovix with another episode of Discussions with David, which comes to you in one form or another most weekdays. Generally, I do broadcast Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, interviewing various notable people of interest. And it goes out on the Facebook pages of Popular Resistance as well as KBOO Community Radio here in Portland, Oregon, and on my Facebook pages and YouTube and Twitter and Twitch, VK, LinkedIn. And it goes out in podcast form afterwards, which you can find if you look up This Week with David Rovix wherever you get your podcasts. And this weekend, the Nigerian English playwright Tayo Aluko has made a new radio play about Paul Robeson, and this weekend we'll be live streaming recording sessions on here on various on my various platforms and Tayo's Facebook page as well, and that will be eventually available in finished form. But if you want to watch rehearsals being live streamed, if you're into that sort of thing, then that's going to be happening this weekend. And I'll be doing a concert at 1 p.m. as well on Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on these Facebook and YouTube pages and such. Today, I'm very happy to have back with us for the first time since April 30th, Ahjamu Umi, a fantastic organizer, author, blogger from currently living in California, who lived here in Portland for many years. And with no further ado, let me just bring Ahjamu on to the screen here. Ahjamu, great to have you back.
Good to be here again, David.
Yeah, it's always the case with these interviews. I never know where to start because there's always too much happening, and I always have too many questions for people. I mean, it's just, I mean, and then, here we are at the end of October, and predictions for the future are always an interesting thing that I like to ask about too, which is a terrible question. But we're not going to start with any predictions. Let's just let's talk about where we're at now, and how have the fires been over there? First of all, you're still alive. Obviously, Sacramento is still there. That we haven't lost any major cities in the past few months due to forest fires. That's on the
Yeah,
plus side.
although it's upticking again in Southern California. I mean, California is huge, right? So Southern California, like Los Angeles area, they're experiencing quite a few recent wildfires right now. I mean, that's 6 hours from where I am, but um, in Northern California, no, we've had several weeks of respite from it.
And it's been now months since the any of the government assistance programs ran out for most people, and I look around here in Portland and I see just daily deterioration of society, and I wonder,
Yeah.
what is that? Can you just talk about what you're seeing around you in terms of desperation and poverty increasing?
Yeah, I mean I live downtown here in Sacramento, so I have daily interaction with houseless people who I live a half a block from the freeway, so there are always a number of houseless people. A number of them stay in this area on a consistent basis, so I have contact with them and talk to them and work with them to the best of our ability. We've had a number of folks who we have moved into houses since this pandemic started, who are out on the streets, and we've targeted a specific capitalist landlord that we've has a number of properties that we've been moving people in, and so far that's gone well. I mean, there have been at least 7 families who we've been able to do that for, but it's clearly the times are desperate. People are out of unemployment and very much trying to do whatever they can to find a way to make it to the next day.
And if it weren't for the I know that as somebody who's been involved with this with the question of housing and the outrageous situation with the housing market. I mean, you're very much aware of the moratorium on evictions and probably thinking, as so many of us are, what possibly things might look like when the moratorium is lifted. I mean, it's just and they're talking about by the time the moratorium is lifted at the end of December, estimates are that renters in the United States will owe, what was it, $40 billion in back rent, in unpaid
Yeah.
rent.
Yeah. I mean, this is a capitalist system, right? It's the most barbaric type of system that humanity can have, and that's what we live in. And so, I think that this is just one more example for people who need more examples. I don't know why you need more, but for people that need more, this is one more example to illustrate that this system makes no sense. Clearly it doesn't. It's not even logical to have the moratorium without any type of process to ensure people have resources to meet their day-to-day living. There are other countries, even poorer countries. I'm not talking about countries in Europe. I'm talking about places like Senegal and certainly socialist Cuba, who, they've basically been paying people to stay in their houses during this pandemic period. And I think that's what you have to do. If you and I think that's why the rest of the world has figured out how to effectively curtail the virus. Whereas, in this society, people have to hustle. They have to find ways to make money. And so they're constantly going to be getting out and interacting with people because that's how you do that. And they're not going to, the resources are not there for them to find ways they're just the moratorium on the surface. Okay. But, all it's doing is creating a bill that people are never going to be able to address.
Yeah, just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's sort of like one of those sort of desperate measures where if they didn't do that, then who knows what would happen. I mean, at the moment, it's like I mean, it's been the housing crisis has been such a crisis for such a long time, but at the point
Yeah.
where we're at now, if they did try to collect all this rent and they didn't have a moratorium, then it's to me it's just hard to imagine what would possibly things look like if they were trying to evict tens of millions of people at the same
Right.
time. What would that possibly look like? I mean, I just I like to think that there would be a revolutionary uprising against capitalism at that point, but of course there's things could go in all kinds of different ways. But clearly, the powers that be are terrified of this situation. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just the rest of us.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, I think in order to have that type of uprising, we have to be organizing to do it. Like it doesn't, well, we don't believe it happens spontaneously.
No.
I know some people do, but we don't believe that. And we don't see any examples in history where that's happened, where revolutions have just happened. But I think that this whole concept of, it's amazing. Like the reason why there's even a moratorium in the first place is because of the mass demand from people to have something. But because we're not engaged in an ongoing organizing process on a mass level, we kind of just stop on that spontaneous level of don't evict us. We raise all kind of cane about that, and so they respond with a crumb of, okay, we'll have this moratorium, but we don't see that this illustrates to us that we're the ones that have the power. So if we just kept going and went further, then we could address the next level of issue, which is, okay, well, in December, we're not going to be in any better shape than we were in March. So you need to waive that. There needs to be forgiveness on this rents. And then from there, we can maybe evolve to a point where people are thinking, why do people have to pay rent anyway? This is stolen land that we're on. Who has the right to charge rent on stolen land? This is indigenous people's land. So maybe we can come to that understanding, and then we can begin to start talking about, the next level of steps to create true justice. But, we only move incrementally based on, what the system, the vision the system provides us. And that's what we have to move beyond, because that's never going to give us what we need to be where we need to be.
I'm always a bit discouraged that there's not more of a follow-up to having this moratorium, and then people around the country taking the opportunity to build on that for a real sort of anti-capitalist movement that questions the whole
Yeah.
ownership of property, division of the land. Why is this Willamette Valley here? Why is it who owns this place? Why 6 generations ago this whole valley was just given away to the so-called pioneers? And but this but there is, are you seeing quite an uptick in organizing though? I mean, there has been an uptick, but it's not as big as any of us would like to see. But it's happening, isn't it? I mean,
Oh,
are you seeing more
absolutely.
of that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the basis of my work is in the Pan-African movement, of course. And so obviously we spend quite a bit of time engaged in that. And, I know that in the U.S., people here, know very little about Africa or any other part of the world, which is part of their plan, the people on top. But, one example of that level of uprising and consciousness raising and action is all over Africa. Like what's happening in Nigeria right now is one example. It's not just Nigeria. I mean, it's the Congo, Sudan, Kenya. It's happening all over the continent. Africa's on fire. And this has been happening for a while now. And to counter that, that's why the U.S. instituted this African Command Program, or AFRICOM, where they built all these U.S. military bases in Africa. There were approximately 100 U.S. military bases in Africa that U.S. taxpayers pay for. And the lie is that these bases exist to counter Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, who are groups that are supposed to be aligned with ISIS. And you haven't heard anything about Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, or ISIS in over a year now. So, as someone who spends quite a bit of time in Africa, I can tell you that's not a dominant concern or issue throughout Africa. The reason why these military bases exist there, not diminishing what challenges have come from those groups, but I'm saying that's not the dominant issue people are facing on the continent. So these military bases were never designed to address that. They're designed to train the local police and military there in counterinsurgency measures to repress the people against these uprisings. And so this latest one in Nigeria, where this so-called anti-robbery squad has been, violently repressing people, hundreds of thousands of people are on the streets
And they
protesting.
renamed it. They renamed it from SARS to SWAT. I mean,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
hearing about it,
and
sometimes it's like, hard to imagine. Like, I mean,
right, and
it's
that's
like they wouldn't have done that here. They would have renamed it to something other than SWAT.
right. But it's good that they did, because
Yeah.
if people study the history of Special Weapons and Tactics Team, that emerged on December 4th, 1969, in Los Angeles, California. The SWAT team was deployed to attack the Black Panther Party office on Central Avenue in Los Angeles. And that, of course, all the police departments imitate the LAPD. And the African Command Program is a part of that imitation process now. So that's a clear example of people standing up against that. Another example is, like, I've been really busy lately. There are a number of groups all over the world, all over this country, who are concerned about safety in this environment we have here, this fascist environment that exists in this country. So I've been doing a number of workshops and trainings on helping people develop collective security plans, collective plans to be safe, collective ways to defend themselves. A growing number of people realize that if these fascists follow through on their threats and your only plan for safety is calling the police, that you're in a dire situation, because that's, as Malcolm X said 50 plus years ago, that's like calling Frank James to get Jesse James off of you. So people are understanding, like, you got to have a much better plan than that. So there are a lot of people. I mean, I can't even, I'm having three or four a week with groups in New York, Colorado. I've done one for people in Canada, people in other states, where we're talking about how do you develop a comprehensive plan. Washington did one for some folks in Washington. How do you develop a comprehensive plan to make sure you and the people you organize with, your family, your friends, you come together and can develop safety for yourself and defend yourselves in your community. So that's a real positive sign because it's, number one, it's what it's demonstrating is that people recognize that the police are not our friends. People are understanding that. And these are not just activists, these are people who normally wouldn't have this level of consciousness. And then also it's showing that, people are recognizing that we do have the capacity to create the type of world that we want to live in. So, even though this work, it requires a lot of energy and it's exhaustive. And that's recently when I drove across country, I went to see my daughter, but a lot of the reason for that trip was also to do some of that work. It's also good to see that this is happening.
Can you talk a little more about that trip across the country? And I mean, was it a really? I mean, when you left the Sacramento area or left the sort of more populated areas of California, like in the north there, did the atmosphere change a lot politically, or did you get to talk to a lot of people?
Yeah, actually, I did. I mean, facilitated as many conversations with people along the way as I could. I drove through 7 states to get to where she is, and drove back. So I stopped. I stayed in hotels and stopped in places, and stopped to eat often, and of course, and talked to a number of people, and it was really surreal in the sense that people are there's like a generic element to existence, right? Like you drive through these states, the messaging is the same, the propaganda, what you see is the same, what you hear on the radio is the same, what you see on television is all the same. So what I focused on doing was talking a lot to workers in gas stations and restaurants. And I probably had about 20, 25 conversations with different people in different states like Oklahoma, Arkansas. And what I found from people is that people are really worried, really concerned about what their future is going to hold. But yet a lot of these people, even at the same time, are relying on the same old tropes and solutions to address these problems. Like the states I drove through are huge Trump supporting states, and that his propaganda was everywhere. I drove through 4 caravans of these caravans they're doing for Trump. I drove through 4 of those where there are hundreds of people each time, and they're doing that. And I would stop and talk to them. And these are people who are, again, they're out of work. They have no security, financial security. They have nothing. And yet, because this man is saying, well, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to make things okay, they believe that. And so that's what they're grasping onto and relying on to be their plan for the future. There's a lot of that, but then also there's also a lot of people who, even in those areas, who are like, yeah, we need something else. So, a lot of conversations about systemic change, which normally you wouldn't expect that, but, a 65-year-old gentleman at a hotel in Oklahoma, I had an hour conversation, 65-year-old white gentleman about the need for this system to go, and he was someone who in 2016, I guess he drank that Kool-Aid for Trump. But now today he's like, yeah, this is not good for any of us. And so these to me, the way I look at it, these are all promising signs of what potentially can happen if we, come together and continue to intensify our work.
It really, I mean, I often find just actually talking to people one on one, there's a lot of a lot of people are questioning things, including, as you say, like people who voted for Trump 4 years ago. So it's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't all just break down so neatly. But at the same time, like the mainstream media, I mean, they're like, I don't know what that is anymore, really. I mean, it's like the Democratic Party media, the Republican Party media, and it's all just garbage. But it's just amazing how I didn't even realize, because I tend to ignore it. I hadn't realized that CNN and Fox had become this like two-party media thing. Like,
Yeah.
I watched both recently, and that was a recent discovery. But NPR has been talking a lot about civil war in the United States, talking about all the right wing militias and how heavily armed they are, and it's anybody who's been involved with protests or just in life in the United States, in ever, knows that the police are always siding with the far right unless there's enough far right in the streets that they don't need police protection, in which case the police absent themselves from the town and let the far right do whatever they want. And that's been happening, regularly in Portland and Louisville and many other cities across the country in the past few months. But like they talk about Civil War, and I just have a real hard time imagining what would the sides be for such a. I mean, do can you talk about that when they talk? You hear them talking about this term all the time.
Well,
Civil,
yeah. I mean, from our perspective, as African people under this empire, and I mean, I grew up in the inner city, and have had a lot of time and experience to interact on confrontational levels with these white supremacist groups, these militia groups, all of them over the years. And so, from our perspective, like what we see is that despite the blustering and the posturing that these people do, I find it hard to believe that they really want this war, this race war that they want us to believe they want. Because if they really wanted that, they could have had that a long time ago. Like all they have to do is go into any inner city in this country and they would get more than they bargained for. There are plenty of people who are stressed, upset, frustrated, oppressed, and would love nothing more than to see a group of white supremacists walking down the street wanting a confrontation. So these people, to me, I don't believe that they really want that. And I don't believe that they're really organized on that level to do that. I think the larger danger is these groups here and there going out and committing terrorist acts against unsuspecting people. I think that is without question a danger. Because historically, that's how they've done what they do anyway. They go out, 5 or 6 of them, whether you're talking about the Ku Klux Klan during the civil rights movement in the South, whether you're talking about in the northern cities, they, 4, 5, 6 of them, 10 of them go out, and you're out, you're African, you're indigenous, Latino, Asian, you're LGBTQ, and it's you and maybe your partner, you, maybe your friends, you by yourself, and they target you and attack you. That is what we need to be focused on and get prepared for. So a lot of these trainings that, I'm engaged in, that's what we're doing. And then the other part of that is, the police repression and helping people understand how to be as prepared as possible to deal with that. So I think those are the things that are going to happen. But any type of mass uprising of the white right, I mean, I don't see that level of organization, and I don't think that they, there's certainly a number of them among them that are unhinged and, are unstable and will do anything. And violence is always those people's friends. But I just don't see that level of organization. There's nothing to me that indicates they have that level of organization and or the desire and the will and the courage to do that on an organized basis. I could, of course, be wrong, but I'm just basing that on history. That I think the larger danger is, them doing what they've done historically on a higher level, picking us off here, there, everywhere. I think that's really, that's already happening. And I think we can unfortunately anticipate seeing a lot more of that.
especially when we know that people like folks like Kyle Rittenhouse are going to be
Right.
praised by the Trump and all that, and then
Right.
probably not facing actual jail time or getting pardoned, or even if he does go to prison, he's still going to be a hero in the minds of a lot of warped people, evidently. So you're not thrilled about Kamala Harris being the potential next vice president?
Well, again, we're revolutionary Pan Africanists. So, my perspective is um, whoever is president, whoever occupies that seat, their job is to uphold capitalism and uphold white supremacy. So, I wrote an article in my blog a week or so ago about a betterworld.me about the quote unquote black bourgeoisie. And then my daughter and I host these weekly 1 hour seminars where we talk about all of the issues impacting the world. And this coming Sunday, that's going to be our topic again, the black bourgeoisie. And what we're talking about here is that there have always been people who have aligned themselves with the system, no matter what community they come from. And, people like Kamala Harris are no different. And I trust me, I really don't need anybody else to try to explain to me the symbolic nature of people who have been oppressed for centuries, seeing people that look like them occupying seats of power in the system. But what we're saying to that is that, number one, symbolism is not going to solve the oppressive conditions that we face. Rather, that's not going to address that. And number two, these folks, that's a high price to pay. For people talk about, obviously I have these conversations in the African community every day, and people are always talking about, Barack, Michelle, and their daughters, just the beauty of seeing that. And to me, that in and of itself is a real reflection of the dysfunction. It's like we are so trained, and it's not just African people, it's everybody underneath the capitalist system. We're so trained to view our value and to gauge our value based on the values perpetuated by this system, that the only way we can see ourselves making any progress and having any impact is to occupy the seats that the system provides for us. And, my perspective is totally different. I don't need any validation from this system. I want to destroy this system. And to me, it's really surreal that people would actually in 2020 feel like people occupying individual positions is somehow going to do something to change the suffering of the masses of people. There's zero evidence of that whatsoever. And again, going back to the point where we talked about a little earlier about, the moratoriums on evictions, the only reason why Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are even talking about things like ending systemic racism is because people being on the streets. Millions of people being on the streets around the world. If that wasn't happening, you think those people would be talking about that? They are representatives of the bourgeoisie class. And I think people have really got to learn to come to grips with that. That's why they can be on stage and they can talk about ending systemic racism. And in the very next sentence, they support fracking. They support the police. How are you going to do? You can't do. It's either one or the other. You can't do both.
Yeah.
But they're telling you, these are the interests that we represent. And the problem with this is that they will do things to actually enforce policy around fracking. They will do things to support the police and military imperialism around the world. And they won't do, I'm telling you right now, 4 years from now, they will have done nothing to end systemic racism in this country, because this country is built and maintained on systemic racism. So no, I can't be satisfied with a token person in a position in the capitalist system. I'm trying to seek liberation and justice for all of humanity.
But the token thing is about all they seem to have to offer, right? I mean, there's the demands coming from the street for defunding the police, which I think is I was so excited about this campaign, because it's just like you say, you need to have a large amount of really organized people. But when you have these kinds of demands that are clearly impossible for the system to acquiesce to without capitalism crumbling, then then it kind of lays bare the way the system works. I mean, half the budget in all the cities is going to the police, and their
Right.
best effort that the best thing they seem to be able to do in terms of answering people's demands is say, well, we'll have an oversight body, or we'll do a little more training, or we'll have a little more people of color in the ranks of the police force. I mean, they've already done all that stuff. That's already
Yeah.
all been done.
Right. And I think people have to, really learn how to be aware of the insidious nature of what the bourgeois class does. Because I would argue that it really has never been about defunding the police, whatever that means. The movement was to abolish police. And what the bourgeois class has done has been to attempt to soften that by saying, all we want to do is just, the left wing of the bourgeoisie class. Let me say that. All we really want to do is just kind of just take money away from the police. So like if police are on a college campus, they will no longer be there. Instead, we'll hire private armed security who are probably going to be even worse.
Oh yeah, if that's all that's done, yeah.
Yeah, that's just how they frame now this has somehow become the conversation when the conversation was about eliminating police. We don't need police. It's about, the work that we do, community defense work in terms of helping communities learn how to protect themselves. That's the conversation. Eliminating police. The police are an institution of oppression. They were started based on employing people to terrorize my ancestors into returning to the slave plantations. That's how police started. So no institution like that is here to protect and serve anybody, especially not people that look like me. So we want to abolish police and eliminate police. And don't come at us with this, well, I hear this all the time. My husband is the police. My brother's the police. They're not all bad. And it's like, clearly this is a hyper contradiction, because when you're talking about like Black Lives Matter, if one person burns one car, then the entire Black Lives Matter movement is guilty. But cops kill thousands of people every year. And yet you want to talk about, well, not all of them are bad. And I don't care about your brother or your uncle or your sister or your whoever it is, because their presence on these police forces is doing nothing to stop this systemic terror from happening. So it's irrelevant to talk about them being there. And, police always talk about this, people that no snitching, particularly in African and indigenous Latino, because they won't know there's no snitching. There is no better anti-snitching culture in the world than the one that exists with the police. They wrote the manual on anti-snitching. When police do something to terrorize the community, you never see other police come forward talking about, yeah, they did this. This was wrong. We want to get them, they need to pay the price for terrorizing the community. They never say anything. And, like cases in Portland, for example, when I lived there, when they killed young Kendra James, the police who were involved in that went to the restaurant there on Interstate and sat down to organize their stories. And they did that with Walter Scott. They did that with Eric Garner. They do that all the time. So, these arguments about, apologizing for the police are irrelevant. This movement was about eliminating police, and somehow the discussion has been co-opted to become one of just transferring money around to replace one terrorist with another.
And I wonder, how does that argument get how does it get turned into that? I mean, there are obviously anybody who wants to pretend that they're listening to people on the street has to talk about doing something about the police, but at the same time, it's understood, at least by some, that the police are really there to maintain the whole capitalist order and
Right.
extreme inequality in this society. And without the police, then who's going to maintain this extreme inequality?
Right.
And,
Right. But if you think about it, David, and people, listening, watching, whoever, if you even just attended a single protest, then you can understand how this co-optation happens. Like when you go to a protest, what happens? People are out in the streets because they're upset about an injustice. And at the point that they come to the streets, they're ready to do a lot. They're ready to do a lot. If people say, well, let's take over this building, a lot of people are willing to do that. If they say, let's shut down this street, a lot of people are willing to do that. And the militancy is unchecked. And I learned this as a very young man. I saw this play out and I began to understand how it happens. And if you've gone to these protests, you've seen it. So what happens? You go to the protest, ends up at City Hall or the state capitol, wherever it's going. And what happens? A politician comes down to talk to the protesters. And then from that point forward, the militancy is sucked out of the entire process. Oh, we're listening to you. We're here to listen to you. We're going to see what we can do to address the problem. And, again, because our identity is so tied up in the capitalist system, when the representatives of the capitalist system come down and actually sit and talk to us, we actually believe that means we're making progress. And so we accept that on that basis. And then the energy is sapped out and nothing happens to change the actual conditions. So the whole process is designed to usurp the militancy. And these politicians, Biden, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, whoever it is, their role, their function is to suppress the militancy. We saw it with the NBA, with the National Basketball Association. The players were ready. They stopped playing during the play. The Milwaukee Bucks said, we're not playing tonight. This was in July when this happened, right? We're not playing. And then all the other teams said, well, we're not playing either. And then the sister Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, I'm not playing. And even Major League Baseball, which will never be confused for a progressive sport politically, even baseball that day said, well, we're not having our games. And so now you had a strike, an actual labor strike happening in professional sports, unprecedented on that level in this country's history. And what happened? The basketball players voted, and they were voting to suspend the rest of the season. They weren't even going to finish the season. LeBron James was the major spokesperson saying, let's not even play anymore. Kawhi Leonard, the two biggest, arguably, players in the world, were saying we don't even need to play anymore. I mean, this is unimaginable that this would happen. And what happened next? Here comes Barack Obama. Don't strike, vote. Okay. So then now basketball, business as usual, everything's business as usual. The capitalist system is protected because if you got people ready to strike and ready to protest and ready to be militant, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what limits can be placed on it. You don't even know if limits can be placed on it. But if you tell people, well, just vote and don't do anything else, then you know immediately that the capitalist system will be preserved. So, that's why I say that's Obama's job to do that. And all the people like him to quell the militancy, get people to believe that just go ahead, just take one step further. The capitalist system will find some way to take care of you. And we continue to suffer in more and more and mounting misery.
Yeah, what a moment that was when he said, basically, don't strike, vote. I mean, what a voice for that to come. I mean, if it had come from anywhere else, maybe there would have been some more of a conflict over the whole question of striking versus voting. But then you have wow. And then on that note, I feel like every time Biden gives a speech, I mean, to the extent that he's capable of giving a speech, every time he gives a speech, it's I feel like it's just more gaslighting every time. I mean, he's constantly talking about how the economy was booming under his and Obama's administration, and anybody who was a renter or a low had most kinds of mortgages, or I mean, people just so many people lost their homes, so many people struggled and it was a terrible time. And not, of course, the Bush years were also terrible, but things have just been getting worse for several decades now. And they continue to get worse under Obama, Biden. And then he's going around. And so it's just, I don't know, it's I don't understand why people are why people don't get it, that there'd be such disaffection with this kind of leadership, and where people would want to throw a bomb into the electoral arena by voting for somebody like Trump. Although it's also hard to imagine actually doing something like voting for Trump, but trying to put myself in the shoes of people who just maybe don't know any better or don't understand some of the bigger picture of why capitalism is the problem. It can be,
Right.
grasping at straws. But
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I think that, for me, it's not just a thing of, well, don't do that. That's not going to get us any farther. Like, we're not even telling people not to vote. If you believe that voting is the solution to the problem, then you go ahead and do that. But what we are telling you is that if that's your strategy, it's got to be more than just voting, because after November 3rd, then what do? How do you hold the system accountable to represent the interests of the masses of people? There's no strategy to do that. So what we're telling people is that if that's what you're saying you want to do, then you have to at least organize a mass movement that can push the system to the left to represent people's interests and to do things to improve people's lives. I mean, if you think back to the 1960s, that was the powers. At least there was a mass movement. There was a pushback. That's why you got the civil rights bill passed into a law. That's why you got the voting rights bill passed into a law. That's why you got the 1965 Immigration Reform Act. I was telling a friend of mine from the Philippines the other day who was praising, longtime friend, not on a political level, but just from living next to each other as neighbors, that this person's saying, well, America's giving me all the freedoms I have. Like, America didn't even want you and your family here. It was my people's civil rights movement that pushed the Immigration Reform Act that eliminated the quota system, which made it so that people from colonized countries could even start immigrating here on a mass scale. So you're crediting the country that didn't want anything to do with you. So this was mass movement that did this. So the issue that I have with people vote is that you don't even study the history enough to know that just voting with no movement to hold the system accountable to you is playing right into the hands of the system, because you have no way to hold it accountable. You have no way to, and so that's why they can get away with what you just talked about. They're talking about all of them arguing with each other about how many jobs they created, and not one of those jobs that they created is a quality job where we're talking about there is no state in this country right now that is producing jobs with livable wages, affordable and quality health care, with pension programs, quality work conditions. None of them. They're talking about the fastest growing industry everywhere are service jobs. And I have nothing against. I'm totally in support of service industry people. I live alone. I eat out a lot. I would probably be dead without those people. But I'm saying those are not the jobs that are going to build a sustainable society where you're paying people minimum wage with no benefits and no long-term, no pension, nothing. Just come to work every day, work yourself to the bone, and have nothing to show for it. That's not the model that's going to move us to the next level. But I know in Oregon, that's like 40% of the emerging industry. It's higher than that here in California, and that's the case everywhere across the country. I mean, I work for a labor union. I have an economics background. When they're talking about they created these jobs, that's just subterfuge that they're throwing at you to get you to believe that something good is happening. There are no quality jobs being created in this country, and that's what we need to be pushing for if we really want to, put people in a position where they can improve their lives and stabilize.
But then, of course, the more the jobs pay, the more the landlords can charge. And this is also a pattern that goes way, way back. I mean, I was reading about how in the 1840s in New York City, some of the biggest supporters of the emerging labor movement were the landlords.
Right.
Because they knew they could charge more for the workers.
Right. That's right. And that's why everything has to always be connected to what needs to happen to eliminate this capitalist system. In our view, that's true. Like, we can't find what we're looking for while this system remains intact. And so many people
that is becoming more and more apparent.
What's that?
That's becoming more and more apparent to more and more people as the pandemic unfolds, and as the economic consequences of it and the inability of the government to cope with it due to capitalism and so many other things. I mean, it's it just becomes. I mean, when they're talking about, and then of course the whole movement against police murdering people, black people, brown people. I mean, and then the fact that this movement is going on at the same time as as we're facing this kind of eviction crisis, which is overwhelmingly being faced by poor people who are disproportionately brown and black. I mean, it's just the way that the whole thing is snowballing is
Right.
just astounding. And I mean, certainly in our lifetimes, I think it's fair to say there's never been this kind of snowball effect in terms of problems leading to more problems, leading to more problems, leading to more sort of blatant exposure of capitalism as something that is just constantly failing to deal with to create any kind of a sane society. It's constantly causing more and more inequality and compounding institutional racism. It's just it's becoming more obvious to more and more people, it seems, and
Yeah.
that's quite a moment.
And I think that's true in the US. I mean, I think in most parts of the world it's been pretty clear for a long time now. Like, the contradictions are stark. Like, there's a small element of people who have resources and the majority have nothing. So the people are not confused. Like, you go throughout Africa, there's little confusion about this. But I think for folks here, because of capitalism's imminent state of decline and its inability to provide the comfort to as many people as it had been able to do over the last 60, 70 years, that people, you're right. I think people are becoming much, much more aware of this contradiction and the fact that, it has to be addressed. And, for me, I would just say to people, like, just on a positive level, we have to get more people involved. I think the fundamental problem that we face now is that so many people are looking at these developments from the sideline. They're not involved in any, they might go to a protest here and there, but they're not involved in any ongoing work to build capacity to address the problem. And this is, as long as we're doing it like this, we're never going to be able to make progress, because the people that we're fighting against are organized. All of these state institutions are organized. They're organized to repress humanity and ensure that it's repressed to protect the interests of the capitalist system. And we think that we can fight that by just every once in a while showing up. And that's not happening. So, what we always tell people is that people got to get involved. Like, we need everybody to be involved in some level of organization. And people, always want to talk about what organization it is. Like, that's, if you're trying to go somewhere and you don't have a car, you have no car. Then you don't need to be talking about, well, I only ride in a Mercedes Benz. You have no transportation. Okay, the first thing you need to do is get something that will move you from point A to point B. And once you do that, then you can begin to understand from an informed perspective, well, I need something that has more legroom. I need something that has more horsepower. I need a better sound system. I need better air conditioning, whatever the case may be. And then now you can talk about how to get something better. But as long as you don't have any level of transportation, you're standing still. You're not moving anywhere. So we got to get people involved. And once people get involved, then they can begin to understand, well, I don't really like that approach. I think this approach is better. But as long as people are not involved other than just, in the peanut gallery making comments, then we will never be able to grow beyond the level that we're at right now. And people listening, watching in organizations know this is true, because I don't even know you, and I know your organization is 3 or 4 people doing all the work. And we're never going to be able to confront the forces oppressing us with that level of attack. We have to get more people involved. And I'll just give you one more example. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's there are a number of African people who have organized into militias. The fastest growing number of people in this country buying guns are African people, which makes sense. I don't know what took them so long, but anyway, they're doing that now. And they're showing up with these guns and marching. And, people always ask me, what do you think of that? And I'm like, well, I don't understand it, to be honest, because, if I'm going to go to the Ku Klux Klan headquarters, I'm not just going to go there and stand in front. Like, when I leave, that headquarters needs to no longer be there.
Yeah, you're going to give them your address too?
Yeah, I don't get the point of just showing up there. Like, the Klan they have 100-year history of terrorism against us. They are not going to be moved because a few of us show up there with guns. They don't care about that. That's who they are. So these are savages. So, I think that this kind of symbolism, and people are like, oh, this is wonderful. But it's the same thing I talked about with the Obamas. It's symbolism. And some of us are well past symbolism. We want to solve the problem. And it's impossible for me to see how 1,500 people with guns, when the overwhelming majority of people are not even involved in the struggle, is going to do anything to advance us. I mean, we know from history that militias without the political direction of the people is dangerous. Okay, so all you got to do is look at like the Inkatha movement in Azania, or what you all call South Africa, to see that, where you had the Inkatha movement was used by the apartheid regime to sabotage the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and the groups who were fighting against apartheid in Azania, South Africa, because they were just a large military organized group with no political consciousness. So we got to get people involved to address that. And once we do that, we will see things change overnight. I truly believe this.
There's this kind of community. I mean, there's a lot of, with so many people pouring out into the streets all over the country on a daily basis. I think that kind of like enthusiasm is impressive, with or without real organization. But organizing is also happening. Yeah, I mean, not to the extent that it needs to happen, but it seems like around all kinds of issues around tenant rights and stopping eviction. I mean, have you seen the in Kansas City, folks shut down the eviction court with chains and stuff? That's pretty cool.
And this is great. It's just all we have to do is get a whole lot more people engaged in these types of activities so that we can carry it through to complete victory. That's all we need. We need to do that. Like, even if you talk about protest lines, there's ways to organize protest lines so that, we don't just go take over a freeway for an hour, but we have shifts. We have people organized to come take over for people. We can shut it down for weeks. And if we can do that, then now we're affecting commerce, the movement of commerce and products. Now you're forcing the capitalist system where it has to, engage in some real negotiations, and you have leverage to negotiate. For those of you that believe in the system, that I'm talking about you. Like, I'm for revolution, but I'm saying for those that are, you're saying, well, this is, we need to work within the system. Then at the very least, that's the kind of stuff that should be happening. That's not happening wholesale, and we have to move to that point. It's a higher level point. Yes, there are a lot of good things happening, but we could do so much more if we just got more people engaged
in real organizing.
Yes.
Community organizing. Ahjamu, I know that a lot of union leadership has been talking in this country recently about organizing some kind of a general strike in case of a coup, which is kind of new talk to hear coming out of AFL-CIO. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, like everything else in this society, most of the unions are run like corporations today. And what I mean by that is, we don't have a consciousness in society to the level we need to have it. And I think that genuine labor organizers we're really struggling to push that. The same thing I'm talking about here, that we have to raise the consciousness of workers. We have to give workers a class consciousness that doesn't exist right now. So, some people in AFL-CIO could make that statement, but the capacity of workers in this country is not at the level where people are ready to organize a mass strike. Anybody that says that is being completely idealistic. A lot of the people in a lot of the people represented by unions support the right wing, and so, I mean, we have a lot of work to do. I think the labor movement is an outstanding movement, but we have so much work to do to raise the level of consciousness of workers. I mean, white supremacy, homophobia, patriarchy, all these things are dominant in the labor movement. And how are we going to make progress with those things dominant? Like, we have to do that work. And that's just not the labor movement. That's every movement. This is true. This is a principle. So I think that, we got to continue to do that work. The same thing I just said, like, we got to get more people engaged in that direction. It's a great statement, but I just don't see it as realistic with what I know of the level of consciousness of people in these large labor unions in this country right now.
That's a really good point. You just make a whole lot of really good points. But you were mentioning before about uprisings happening all over Africa, and that's been going on for, like, I mean, for the past several years. There's been tremendous
Yes.
movements in Sudan and Algeria and in so many different countries, and to say nothing of the massive movements just a few years before that around what they call the Arab Spring. But in Nigeria, the movement has been, at least in recent weeks, it seems like this movement has really rose up against police
Yeah.
brutality, violence, murder, total unaccountability. But I also get the impression that the political leadership in Nigeria is not. They don't. I don't get the impression they have control over the police. Like it's a separate thing, right? Is that is
Yeah,
that
I
your
mean,
understanding?
to a large extent, that's true. Like we talked about, AFRICOM is there. They're the ones training them. They're using Zionist Israel to train them. You got all these police and military in Africa who are, you can see, you can look at the videos. They're using Krav Maga tactics, which is the Israeli Defense Force, the hand-to-hand fighting methodology. They're using that on people in Africa. So, Zionist Israel has been active in Africa for 75 years in terms of destabilizing Africa, because most people don't know this, but Israel's one of their main economic foundations is the processing of polished diamonds. And there's no diamond mines in occupied Palestine. Those diamonds are coming from Africa, from Central and Southern Africa. So, 30-40% of the polished diamonds in the world today are that's happened in Israel. So they have a vested interest in maintaining instability in Africa. So they work through this African Command Program, and they're training all of these police and military to repress these people. These miners that mine this gold and these diamonds are rising up and resisting, and they got to prevent that from happening. So yeah, so to a large extent, you're right. Like Buhari, the president of Nigeria, he doesn't control that process, and no president in Africa controls any of these industries and anything happening in Africa. All of them are just paid puppets for imperialism. Their job is to sit there and to ensure the people are repressed so that multinational corporate interests, whether it's Apple or Samsung or Motorola in the Congo through the cobalt, for the devices we use that we're communicating on right now, whether it's the diamond or gold industry, whether it's cocoa in Ghana, whether it's rubber in Nigeria, whether it's oil or rubber in Liberia, whether it's oil in Nigeria. That's what all these presidents are there to do, is make sure these Shell and all these corporations can continue to do what they're doing, and that the people have no ability to disrupt that. So, what people are doing on the streets now in Nigeria and Congo, Rwanda, Kenya, is they're saying, enough of that. We want to run these people out of here. We should not be the poorest people in the world. And Shell and De Beers and all these corporations, Firestone are the richest corporations in the world, taking what comes from where we come from, and we have nothing to show for it. So we want to change that. We want to change, and that's what they're doing. And these military apparatuses are prepared to do whatever they have to do, because their entire future is banked on continuing to maintain, that exploitative system.
Yeah. It's bizarre fact of history that having incredible wealth tends to produce incredible poverty, huh? Like the more resources a country has, the more
Right.
yeah.
But the positive thing, really quick, is that when I first went to Africa over 30 years ago, I went to Ghana, and at that time, Kwame Nkrumah, he was a persona non grata in Ghana. He was the first president of Ghana. The CIA overthrew his government. He was persona non grata. His books were outlawed in the country. You couldn't, see or hear or talk about him. Now that's changed. His face is everywhere throughout Africa. And this is a positive thing, because people are seeing the vision that he talked about, 50 years ago, and how important that is for Africa and the rest of the world. And so this is a reflection of people's mass consciousness. And this is what we need, is mass consciousness. We need that, and people engage on a mass level. And once we begin to have that, I don't care what they do, we will be able to be victorious.
Yes. That's a better note to end on. And your weekly workshops that you do online with your daughter, that people can find that at betterworld.me?
Yeah, you can find it at betterworld.me. And then you can also, if you just go to Facebook, you can go to Facebook slash Ahjamu.Umi, and it's there. And, every Sunday, 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. But yeah, all the information is at betterworld.me.
Thanks so much for being on the show again.
Yeah, thank you. Always great to talk to you, and keep up the good work.
You too.
Forward
See
ever.
you again.
All right.
Forward. Yes. And thanks everybody for tuning in to this discussion with Ahjamu Umi. You can read more of his many, many writings. He's constantly writing fantastic blog posts and doing workshops every weekend. Go to abetterworld.me, and I'll be back online here on Friday, interviewing somebody. I should know, but I'd have it. I'll tweet about it. And Saturday, Sunday, once again, if you want to tune into our online recording sessions for Tayo Aluko's radio play about Paul Robeson's experience in Peekskill, New York. That's going to be happening on and off throughout the weekend, and I'll be doing a concert at 1 o'clock Pacific time on Saturday, 4 o'clock Eastern time. And thanks for tuning in. Remember, mutual aid will get us through. Don't pay the rent. Trust your neighbors. And get organized.